Well, welcome back to Show Me the Money at Rugby League TV. The Championship and League One are heading towards the finish line. We're in the final 9 rounds of the Championship and the final 7 rounds of the League One season. Well, we're going to start with the Championship. Certainly, there's been a whole host of magnificent, drama-filled encounters and spectacles in recent weeks, and certainly as we head to the final 9 sort of home running of this fantastic season, it's going to be interesting to gauge just exactly where everybody is. Clearly, at the start of the season, when we did the Championship preview, myself and Jimmy, we said, the top 4 was more than likely to be a mixture of Bradford, Oldham, Toulouse and York, and I don't think anybody will be shocked or surprised that the top 4 currently is a mixture of Bradford, Oldham, Toulouse and York. I know the bottom 4 was a little bit more difficult to predict, but a couple of the clubs that we kind of said that would be in there were Hunslet, were London, were Batley. I know Jimmy kind of had Sheffield a little bit higher. I had Barrow actually in that bottom 4. I think we both had Barrow in the bottom 4. So yeah, it's just interesting to gauge where the Championship is now versus what we said right at the start, which is really, really interesting. But this weekend, for instance, we are doing this on a Thursday ahead of the round 17 fixtures. It's certainly season defining for mine for a number of clubs, and it's interesting when you speak to some of the coaches like I have done this week already. They don't see it that way, but when you look at potentially the points available and the breathing space or the lack of breathing space, certain games this weekend are going to influence. We are at a real sort of earthquake pivotal point in the Championship season. Well, we'll get your thoughts, Jimmy, on everything. I mean, Toulouse top of the pile. I don't think I know you had Bradford top. I firmly had Sylvan Hoolers and Toulouse top. They're spending 1.3 million. They are the only full-time team. I still firmly believe with 9 to go, they will finish top, and all routes to the Championship Grand Final will run through Toulouse. And they don't lose many at home, and it's going to be a formidable task for any of the part-time teams from Bradford, York, Oldham. Not writing those clubs off, by the way. I'm just saying history dictates going to Toulouse in the playoffs. You're more than likely to be coming back empty-handed. Certainly Toulouse and Sylvan Hoolers' side are well-oiled machine, and you've got to say at the moment you're probably looking at York as potentially one of those clubs that would challenge and give Toulouse a good run for the money. Oldham are finding form. Featherstone, despite their on-field issues that have come to light this past week with Mark Campbell going through the courts to regain his shares, which he says Paddy Hanlon and Martin Vickers transferred and shared to themselves illegally, but on field, Featherstone are going through a great run of form. And one thing we'll say about the Championship, Jimmy, I don't think any side this season has shown any degree of consistency. Bradford had that 7-game unbeaten run. York had an 8-game unbeaten run. York are going through this unbeaten run, but at the start of the season, they were very, very hit and miss. So I think ultimately, the last 9, as Brian Noble said yesterday when we spoke at Odsall for the York game this weekend, it's going to be who has the form, who gets the form, who maintains the form in the run into those playoff games. But it's going to be really, really exciting. And the crazy situation we've got at this moment in time is we've got the bottom 4 with London picking up back-to-back results, and they host Doncaster this weekend. I spoke to Craig Lingard after their defeat to York last Sunday, and there's a lot of excitement around the bottom 4 because who's going to finish in the top 4 of League One, who's going to finish in the bottom 4 of the Championship. We know there's the council vote next Tuesday, and that ultimately is probably going to decide whether or not we are expanding the Super League to 14, whether or not we are merging the Championship and League One competitions. So yeah, we're kind of going to do this show on the basis, on the proviso that the bottom 4 are still in real jeopardy of going into League One next year, because the season has started, and it'd be the most rugby league thing, or the most unlike rugby league thing, Jimmy, for the goalpost to be moved and changed after a ball has started. But yes, I know Craig Lingard won't mind me saying this, but something resonated when I spoke to Craig post-match, because I said, Craig, how is this uncertainty affecting Sheffield's retention and recruitment for next year? And he just said, rugby league, certainly at Championship League One level for this year, it's the only sport that he's ever come across where year on year you're 3 months out, 2 months out from the end of the season, and you still don't know what you're playing for, how much money you're going to be getting, what the structure look like, and what is happening next year. And I totally agree. Whatever happens next Tuesday at this council meeting in Wakefield with the RFL, the implementation committee, the new people on the RFL board, the new board at the RL Commercial, there has to be sense and stability. Is that too much to ask in rugby league terms? I don't think it is. Can we have some stability and something that makes sense? Because if it doesn't make sense to the coaches, and it doesn't make sense to the players, and it doesn't make sense to the clubs, how do you expect the key stakeholders, the supporters, the sponsors, the broadcasters, to get behind it? But yeah, I just thought that really resonated with me, because I thought, you know what, Craig, you're absolutely spot on. We're umming and ahhing, is Super League going to 14? Are we then going to merge Champion League One? Nobody knows what the hell's going on. And effectively, like you say to me all the time, Jimmy, this club's not spending, this club's put the brakes on. This is affecting, people like yourself and obviously the clubs and the players, because if nobody's spending and we do end up with a hold up year, when, next year is basically just a holding year till any big changes in 27. But yes, Championship and the lie of the land, because it's madness, isn't it, when you think about it?
Yeah. How long was that, Sam? That was some intro, that, wasn't it?
I think that was 8 minutes.
That's a record.
Thank you for listening to me for the first 8 minutes.
Great show. See you then.
My lips is it now.
No, but I think you've summed it up perfectly. I'm trying to remember. You did ask a question in there somewhere, and
there's a few questions in there. To be fair, Jimmy.
But I think first of all, I think we have to discuss it today in the sense that nothing is going to change, and that the bottom 4 and top 4 will have a middle eights, and 3 teams will retain or gain championship status. Yes. And the rest will go down. Whether that happens or not, neither of us are convinced, are we? The last few weeks has been interesting, because my feeling is that most clubs now are expecting a merger of some description next year. Whether it's 2 separate conferences with a really good playoff system, which would be exciting, if we have effectively East and West Conference, and we have the top 5 from each conference going into a big playoff, so the bottom 5 going into, effectively a wooden spoon playoff, that would be exciting. Or whether they stick them all in one big league, but the fixtures are done in a way that effectively you play home and away against your more local clubs, and you might only play someone from the other conference once, whether it's home or away. So I feel that the last couple of weeks especially, most clubs are starting, recruitment-wise, for really getting going now. Probably had more action in the last 2 to 3 weeks than the previous 2 to 3 months. A lot of that is probably going off what they heard at the last meeting, and it seems that there is going to be, a push towards these conferences. But like you say, it probably does hinge on what they do at the top.
Correct. It will.
Yeah. If they move to 14, then they've probably got to do it now. And for me, a lot of people at different clubs will ask me, like, what you're hearing. And my response now is, I believe that they'll do it, I'm not sure whether it'll be 2 separate conferences or one big league, for the simple reason that if in 2 weeks they say we'll do it in 27, where does that leave everyone for 1 full year? Where does that leave clubs with? Do they just pull back on spend because they know there's absolutely nothing to play for next year, and it's all about let's save and go bigger the year after? Does that then leave players getting offered way lower than they're on? And how does that affect the player pool? Do we leave, there could be 20, 30 players who go, well, I'm not going to take a 50% pay cut. I'll just call it a day. And I think that could be so detrimental that it is a case of now or never, and yes, moving the goalposts mid-season is not ideal, but, I firmly believe that it is the time to do it, especially if Super League, go to 14. So yeah, that's that in a nutshell of a description, and hopefully in 2 or 3 weeks' time we will know.
Well, we should know. We should know by this time next week.
This time next week, yeah, and then it'll be
what is happening. Yes,
and obviously, without getting stuck into that too much, there is of course going to be negatives. If there's got to be certain games which will be more likely to be blowout games. But other than that, I don't see any other negatives. And Newcastle get pumped every week in League One anyway. Will Rochdale having to go away to Fev be a big scoreline? Probably. But the benefit then for Rochdale is they get to play Swinton twice, Oldham twice. They get to play, even the teams a little bit further away, like Crusaders and so. So I think that's quite easily balanced out. That will arguably be more, every club will have as many competitive games as they have now. They will just have a couple more which could be really tough, but that also gives a chance for them and certainly for players to prove themselves that they can handle the next level. I know, let's take Fev for example. I think, they might be like, well, we don't want blowout scores. We don't want to be pumping everyone. It's like, well, you went to Hunslet the other week and beaten by 2. It's rugby league. You never know what might happen. And it gives aspirational clubs, the League One clubs who are aspirational, who if they get the thumbs up for a merger, their owner might go, well, here's another 200 grand to spend. You could see 3 of those League One clubs immediately start spending more than 4 of the current championship clubs, and that gives them a chance to recruit players from the championship. And from the player side of things, the most exciting thing for the players is there's a lot of players who play in the championship because they don't want to drop down to League One. They believe that they are very much championship players. League One is a significant drop in standard. The fixtures are all over the place. There's not as many games. The clubs and crowds aren't as big. And I totally understand that. And I agree. I've never had a player who said that to me who I don't agree with them, that they are championship standard. But what that tends to leave us with is a lot of clubs have got 5 or 6 lads not playing each week because they want to be a top club, and at the top standard. Whereas now, if there's a merger, everyone's playing at the same level. There'll be stronger clubs and weaker clubs. But that gives players an opportunity to go, well, do you know what? I've had 2 years of being a fringe player at Bradford. I've been 2 years of being a fringe player at York. I want to now move on to another club, play at the same level, but become one of the first 5 names on the team sheet. And that's exciting for players, and it's exciting for those League One clubs who might have a slightly bigger budget and can go, well, let's have a little look who's not played a lot this year, and let's try and steal a few of those players. So I hope it happens. We'll find out soon if it does. But in the meantime, let's start with the bottom. There's only one thing to really discuss in the bottom 4 as it stands, because that bottom 4 isn't going to change, is it? It's hard for me to see. Maybe London, as they start to continually gather momentum, a bit like they did when we ended up getting promoted, could they catch a witness of Doncaster, Halifax? Maybe, but there's still a 6-point gap. It's going to be tough. So it's unlikely that 4 will change. And the team that are in there are the Sheffield Eagles, which after the last few years they've had, not many would have expected at the start of the year.
No.
But a very tough year for all involved, from the very top of the club to the very bottom of the club, for every member of staff. And, you know, Craig Lingard has had an unbelievably difficult job on his hand from day one. Probably harder than he ever imagined. There's probably been more obstacles and more hurdles than he would have imagined. But it's probably gone worse than anybody imagined as well. I don't see him getting out of that bottom four, do you?
No, I mean, you're quite right. London have a bit of momentum with those 2 back-to-back wins, but you know, when you look at the maths, Jimmy, you know, there's 9 rounds to go. There's 18 points. You know, for London, my tip was maybe because London have lost so many games by the narrowest of margins. You know, like losing, they lost to Batley. With a last minute try. They lost to Sheffield with a last minute try. You know, they lost to Widnes really close. Yeah. So for mine, I think London will get out of the bottom 4, but they're not going to make the playoffs.
Oh no, I don't know. You're talking to turn over an 8-point gap, which is effectively 10.
Yeah.
with points difference.
Yeah. So my big call is this: I think London will escape the bottom 4, and.
Who do you put in though? Because
for mine, it's got to be Halifax.
Right, okay.
I speak to a lot of people involved in that club. Well, let's just say it as it is. The pot of money has run out. There is no money for any players to come in and strengthen. There's a number, and this isn't just a Halifax thing. A number of players, as we know, before a ball was kicked this year, were already signing for other championship clubs next year. Obviously, I was speaking to a Halifax player this week, and he said there's quite a few who have already said behind the scenes that they're going next year. I'm sure you know a bit, you know, which players are going.
No, I don't.
But, you know, it's clear Kyle Eastman wants to bring his own players in.
Understandably, yeah. It was he inherited this squad from Finn.
This is Liam Finn, Grix's.
And it was a very good squad, but it was a very small squad.
Yes.
You know, and as injuries have hit them, they've started to struggle.
Yeah, so
I don't think they'll catch him. It's a 7-point gap.
You don't think?
They need to win 4 more games than Halifax win for the rest of the year.
I can see it.
Well, that's a big call.
Big call. Yeah, I'm just saying it. I'm just looking at it, like you say, momentum and consistency, absolutely massive in the championship. And look, I'm not just saying this to, you know, cause controversy, but Halifax no winning 8. You can only really see them getting a win, in my opinion, on paper against Hunslet. Now Batley are strengthening because they've got the Huddersfield Giants and Wakefield players in, players like Aidan McGowan and John Keir's back there. You know, I just think London will escape the bottom 4, and I do think out of Halifax, Doncaster and Widnes, Halifax most at risk of being replaced by London. So that's my big call. With 9 games to go. And to be fair, at the start of the season, I did actually have Halifax in and around those 3 positions, which I've been calling no man's land on the radio. Because it is no man's land, because no one's going to do anything in those 3 positions. You're not in the bottom 4 playoffs, and you're not in the top 6 playoffs. So, you know, and I think what might just save Halifax is that magnificent, you know, start where they went on that unbeaten run up to Good Friday until Bradford beat them at the Share. But like you say, Jimmy, you know, we're talking about momentum, consistency. The feeling I'm just getting from Halifax is, well, let's be honest, when we spoke and did the season preview, people like Damien Clayton, Richard Durgan, they were using lingo like 25 is all about survival, a season of survival. So I think that start to the season might have just kept Halifax in the championship for this year. But yes, on to Sheffield. I was there on Sunday. I covered their game against York. Look, they're doing it tough. Mark Aston is still there in and around the club. Craig has come in. You know, you've got so many different warring fractions at play. You've got the fans on the hill, those protesting against Mark, some protesting against Craig Lingard.
Oh God!
There's a lot of turmoil behind the scenes And what you probably need in this situation where if it doesn't merge, you've got to say Sheffield quite rightly are fighting for their championship survival, for their future. I don't think it's helped. Corey Aston's been injured. Morgan Smith's been injured. Matty Marsh was injured. You know, they lost Ben Jones-Bishop very early on. He decided he wanted to go back to York. And look what he's done at York. Yeah. I think 13 appearances this weekend and he's up to 19 tries. Scored a couple against Sheffield on Sunday. You know, and you're right. And I try to place myself in Craig Lingard's shoes. He's effectively doing what David Moyes did when Alex Ferguson left Man U. You're going into somewhere where Mark Aston, you know, he's been king of the castle for so long, and Mark, I don't really want to go into the reasons why Mark's no longer in charge, but you know, it was the whole situation which ultimately, Jimmy, destabilised Sheffield at the back end of last season, where they just were a shoo-in for the top four. Then it was like they're still going to make it in the playoffs. Then they went to Dewsbury last game of the season and lost and dropped out. And it's almost like what we see now in 25 is like a continuation, a hangover of that. And Mark Aston was there. He's still there. I'm not sure what his official kind of role is, but you know, he's still there in the shirt and the tie, and you know, that for mine is must be a massive distraction for Craig Lingard and everybody for what they're trying to do, which effectively is Craig Lingard has come in, and I think it's 19 years and a couple of months, so nearly 2 decades, where Mark Aston's been in there, in control, in power. He's lost all that, and that is effectively what Craig Lingard's trying to change. And you know, when we spoke to Craig after the game in the post-match press conference, he's ready, Jimmy. Let me tell you, Craig Lingard's ready to roll the sleeves up and fight for Sheffield. But
I think
I cannot see him getting out of the bottom four.
I don't. I mean, I feel like he told me the other day the stats, but the number of halfback combinations they've gone through this year because of injuries,
I think they're up to 9.
I think it were 11.
Was it 11?
11. And bearing in mind, a lot of them are involving like Jack Bussey, you know, people who aren't even halfbacks, and Corey Johnson helping out in that role. So it's just been one of those years which was always going to be tough, and it's been even tougher, and it's gone even worse than probably anyone could imagine. The promising thing is, a bit like Kyle at Halifax, but not as extreme, is he's now got a chance and has started to recruit.
Yes.
And people will move on. People have already moved on. I mean, there might be up to 5, 6, 7 who've left during the course of the year, with another one which will be announced very soon. And he started to bring a few in. And recruitment is hard at this time of the year. But next year, things will definitely be very different there.
Yes.
They've just got to hope, probably as much as any club, that it doesn't end up being these middle eights, because they are, you know, quite vulnerable.
I totally agree, Jimmy. I totally agree. And, you know, when you talk about luck and the rugby league gods, you know, I know there's no such thing as a rugby league god, but oh my God, talk about rotten luck. You know, Jensen Winley, the 18-year-old Castleford Tigers loanee, he's just burst through the York defence and set up a lovely try for Reece Butterworth. There's 5 minutes to half time. It's 6 points apiece. And to be fair, you know, Mark Applegarth said post-match, you know, he thought that was one of the poorer York performances. But you lose Jensen Winley to a HIA, a severe HIA, so he's going to be missing for the next 2 games. And then, you know, you've just signed a young, promising halfback from Castleford, and now you've lost him. You know, you talk about the rugby gods and rotten luck.
Yeah.
They've just done absolutely nothing.
When it rains, it pours, and that's very much Sheffield's.
Yeah, and I think Sheffield, you know, whether next week is good news or bad news, whether they say everything's merging, which effectively will let off a Halifax, a London, a Sheffield, a Batley, a Hunsley, or whether or not it's like doubling down and they say we can't change out for 26, it's 27, you know, 5 of the 8 will go down.
Yeah.
Then, you know, you're going to have to quite rightly, and I'm sorry, Sheffield, I know I've covered a few of your games recently, you're going to quite rightly, squeaky bum time. You are going to be thinking about, we're going to be hosting North Wales, we're going to be going to Midland Hurricanes, we're potentially playing Rochdale, Whitehaven, Goole, Dewsbury, so it's going to be tough.
Ultimately, there is a risk, but as I've said all year, those middle eights are stacked against the League One clubs anyway. So
yes,
and for Sheffield, Hunslet have been doing it extremely tough all year, and they're arguably, they're going that way as well. So I don't, if the middle eights go ahead as they are, I'd still be extremely surprised if Crusaders, who are have now proved themselves as the standout team over Midlands in that division, or Midlands, or anybody manages to displace two championship teams. But if we turn our attention to the top, in your intro, the team you didn't mention in our predictions for the top four, I think we both had Fev in the top four, and they've had a very rocky start to the year, didn't they?
I was looking through our predictions. I had York fourth, Oldham third.
No, you didn't know. We both had Fev third.
Did we both have Everton third?
We did.
I know you had.
I had York third and Fev fourth. I had York, you had it the other way around. Yeah, and we both had. We were just a little unsure on Oldham, weren't we? Could they? And Oldham are doing exactly what we thought. Yes. They might take a while to adjust, but then they could steamroll.
To Oldham, they have invested. Yes, they've invested severely. A lot more than I expected they would do during the course of the season, and fair play to Bill Quinn and Mike Ford and everybody at Oldham for that. But
Featherstone are a team which had a really slow start, but we never doubted when we did our catch up. A third of the way through, we both said we thought Fed would get into the top six, and they now have done. I don't see him not being in there. They will. No one will want to play Fed in playoffs. On the day, like everybody in that top six, on the day at full strength, there's not an awful lot in him. You look at Toulouse this year. Toulouse historically, I don't know this for sure, and at the moment they're on 190 positive points. They're not smashing teams like they used to. They're almost limping through games, and then they might get a late try, and nearly all the scorelines are 32-16, 32-18, and I think that a lot of clubs aren't scared of Toulouse like they used to be.
No.
And I do think that, yes, no one will want to go away there because their home advantage is massive, but these playoffs could be absolutely like dynamite, couldn't they? I'm not ruling York out of winning the league. I think to win the league, they need to beat Bradford at the weekend, and they probably need to go to Toulouse and beat them. But it's very much, I think it's a 3-horse race. When all year I thought it'd only be a 2-horse race. York's form, if they go to, is it at Odsall or is it their place?
No, it's at the LM.
It's at their place, and then you could be looking at 3 of your 4 defeats in the last 3 months have all been against York. And they've got this momentum going in. So that top is shaping up not far from what we predicted, but we have to give a huge shout out to Barrow because they are still clinging on to that top 6, and they're clinging on by the skin of their teeth. But from what you've just said about Halifax, we have different opinions of that. I think Halifax will be all right. And Donny are just gathering a little bit of momentum. They had a very narrow defeat really in Toulouse.
Yeah, after everything that was thrown
after their, the travel was a nightmare, and everything went against them, and they're doing well. They were a team that we both very much had in no man's land, and they could end up, proving us right. But Barrow could hang on to this top 6, and it'll be all credit to them, because for me and you to have them at bottom 4 when it's not often we both agree on something and it be wrong it
just shows you the great job Paul Kerr is doing.
Yeah, brilliant.
As I keep saying every time I cover Barrow, the last 2 previous years, they've survived in the championship on the final game by a point. So go from that to this. Personally speaking, Jimmy, I think Barrow will follow Halifax and they'll drop out. And
Well, who's going to get them?
I think it'll be Doncaster.
Yeah. Donny is certainly the team.
I think.
But you look at.
I've been very, very quietly impressed with Doncaster and how they've been playing. And again, they had a lot of injury adversity at the start of the season. Now they're getting everybody back. I know they've had Logan Moy, the young fullback from Hull FC, on loan a couple of games. Really exciting, future prospect who's had last year when Hull FC were in the Super League in the bottom two with London, he's got a bit of experience, and the fact that Richard Horne, a former player, they can call on that. But I just get this feeling because Doncaster are only a win outside the playoffs, so it's not like it's not like they're a million miles away, and it's been building. It's been building for Doncaster. They pushed Bradford all the way at the Keepmoat Stadium not so long ago. They pushed Toulouse all the way at Toulouse. I'm going to make, I won't call it a big bold call, but I do think Barrow, Barrow for mine and Paul Carey, he will get the coach of the year. What Paul Carey has done at Barrow this year is phenomenal. He will get the coach of the year, and rightly so.
Unless, of course, York end up coming top and winning grand final, and then they've done treble, and you do well not to give it Applegarth if they do that.
Yeah. No, I know where you're coming from, but the head coach, Jimmy, will be awarded before all that.
The knockout.
So, and I'm a firm believer, it should be based on the league season, because and everybody would have had York in the top six in the playoffs.
Yeah,
so
true.
I'm looking at the sort of shock and awe of Barrow going from fighting their championship survival and safety for 2 years and winning the last game of the season to survive by a point to where they are now.
The thing with Donny, I would say out of those teams hoping to sneak a top six, I would say Donny have got the nicest fixture list. Yes. They've got some game. I mean, they go to London away, Widnes away, but then they've got Batley and Hunslet at home. So, you'd be very confident they're going to pick up 4 points, but they could pick up 8. If they win the next 4, Donny are probably locked in for me.
Their game against London this Saturday is huge.
It's huge for both of them, isn't it?
Yeah, that game effectively for mine, and this is what I meant by this round 17. Yeah. A lot of people think, oh God, Gledall's going off on one, but I'm not. When you look at the actual fixtures, it's well, I'll just go through a couple of the fixtures. We'll start with that one. London at home to Doncaster at Ebbsfleet. There's a chance for London to make it 3 wins on the bounce. They would then go to 10 points. They would effectively be 2 games behind Doncaster and Widnes. I still think they cannot make the playoffs, but they can enter no man's land, which would be a massive success for Mike Eccles, when it was only a few months ago at the season launch where he was saying David Hughes is basically left the club for dead. There's no money. We're having to effectively live hand to mouth to meet 4 or 5 players' contracts during the off-season to keep the club going. So that would be a phenomenal effort. And on the flip side of that, Doncaster win, they're potentially in the playoffs this weekend. So that's one of those big key matchups. The other one is Halifax against Toulouse, also on Saturday. That's one of the games I'm covering this weekend. Again, for similar reasons. Halifax, they pushed Oldham all the way on their first temporary home game at Odsal. They only went down by 23 points to 20, and by everybody's admission who I've spoken to, and I've watched a few moments from that game, a lot of self-inflictedness from Halifax with some silly dumb plays which played into the hands of Oldham. But Toulouse historically do not get results at Odsal because it is a tight, small field, and that will restrict the attack of Paul Ulberg, your Ruben Rennies, etc., Anthony Marion. So look, that is another big game, because Toulouse, if they were to lose that, you're then talking potentially a top spot shootout for York and Bradford on the Sunday. But if Halifax were to get a win against Toulouse and end that 8-game winless streak, that is massive. You've got to then say, Jimmy, I'm potentially talking about Halifax and a fall from grace. Well, I'll tell you what, get the handbrake on. You're probably saying that potentially are back in that top.
Yeah, and I think
that would give Kyle Eastman and Halifax, it would be almost like Doctor Who regenerate, and it gives you a new lease of life, and Kyle Eastman can then go, 8 games to go, boys, come on. And you can see that being a catalyst to spark and reinvigorating the Panthers.
I think Halifax will win another 4 games anyway. I don't think they're dropping into that bottom 4, and with far more chance of being back in 6. But like I say, if they do win this weekend, then you'd have to say, well, they're not going to be bottom 4 now.
No,
that's why it's big from your perspective more so than me. I think they can lose this game, but they're still not going in bottom 4 for me, no chance. But if they win this, then all of a sudden, and we know what it's like. You said at the start that injuries and suspensions play such a big part in the champ, and every team who's had that purple patch, especially out of the higher placed teams, is no coincidence. It's when they've got bodies. York, at the start of the year, like they do almost every year, they've got a number of injuries and they're slow to get going, but then they come good. And they've got a thing now at York where it's an open dialogue, but we'll come good. And even psychologically, they know that if they get through that first part, they're going to fly up that league.
Well, that happened 2 years in a row under Henderson. And
I know. And it's almost freaky how it happened. So if they can keep their the number of bodies, the players that they're leaving out on a weekly basis now, there'd be 5 players who go into every other championship team, with maybe the exception of Toulouse and Bradford and Oldham, but still half of them are going. So that's how strong they are. And if we can end up with playoffs where hopefully all those teams have got the majority, no one will have everybody, but the majority of their players fit, that's all we want to see, isn't it? We just hope that in the big games, the teams involved have not got injury issues, because if they have, we can call it before it kicks off. If Bradford are 5 short against York, I'd back York every day.
Well, Bradford have seven missing this weekend.
7 that would be in their 17.
Yes.
Yeah. So for me, then I would give Bradford no chance.
Well, I'm not saying Bradford don't have a chance. I'm just saying.
No, I know you're not, but I think it's that clear cut. The top teams, if the 5 players missing against another top team, that's nearly full strength. It's not going to happen.
You play York against Bradford 100 times. With Bradford and all the injury adversity that they're going to take to there, you'd be mad to say anything other than a York win.
But if they're both at full strength, you'd be saying it'll be 50-50 over
and that's probably similar to Bradford v Wakefield last year, with Bradford having so many injuries last season. You never actually got to see a full strength Wakefield versus a full strength Bradford, and that's similar this year with York.
Yeah, but
and Bradford.
I would have to say that a full strength Wakey last year, it pumped Bradford by 30 on average. They were miles better than it last year. There was no comparison.
Well, Jimmy's just said that by a 30-point average. Well, there was a game at Odsall that was 14 points to 2, and Bradford were down in the dumps with injuries and pushed Wakefield out. But no, look, Toulouse lose to Halifax for mine. That then opens the door to Oldham. It opens the door firmly to Bradford and York. And, one thing I like about York, as we've said, is the fact they have that winning mentality. You look at 3 times grand final winner Paul McShane, Ben Jones-Bishop, who's won grand finals, Challenge Cups, World Club Challenge. You also look at Jordan Thompson, who's won 2 Challenge Cups with Hull. I mentioned that to Mark Applegarth on the press day at York yesterday about that sort of winning mentality, and he quite rightly said, these players, they're driving everything. He doesn't have to do anything. Mark Applegarth he's put York on cruise control because Paul McShane, Ben Jones-Bishop and Jordan Thompson, because the natural born winners, that leadership group is driving everything.
Any successful team in any sport, when they're having a purple patch like this, that's what the coach says. They just said, I just let them go out there.
He said this. He said York are on cruise control.
It runs itself. And you throw in, I've got to give a real pat on the back to their recruitment during this season, and Clint's ability to find Aussies who seem to hit the floor running and, automatically settle into the team. He's added 2 players throughout this year, Galliano and tell me the fullback's name.
Toa Matarafa.
And they've both been immense, since
I agree.
And they're the little snippets where Like, that's what really then allows teams to kick on. For me, there's no doubt about it. They are the team to beat. They are the best team in the championship, and I'm including Toulouse.
Yeah, at this point
because they've got the bodies available.
Totally agree.
And that's why they could go on and win the treble.
No, well, I won't call it the treble, Jimmy. It'd be the double.
No, 1895 league leaders in the grand final.
Well, there's no league leaders in championship.
Right, they might not get a trophy, but I would say that there'll be a lot of pride if that team. Bearing in mind,
whoever finishes top is more than likely hosting the grand final. That's the prize.
Yeah. And
it's not like Super League where we get this little silver trophy or whatever it is play.
If you talk about, like, you know, Barrow getting in the top 6 and Carey coach of the year, that'd be an unbelievable achievement. But there was far more chance of Barrow getting in the top 6 than York winning it. You know, York would have been 12-1 to win title. You had Bradford and Toulouse as massive favourites, coin toss, and then you had Fev, and then you had Oldham, and then you had York. You know, you're talking 5th, 6th favourites. So
I'm not discounting what Mark's done, and quite rightly, he will be nominated. He will be nominated as Coach of the Year. But I just think if Barrow met the playoffs after surviving those 2 years by a point, that's the greater turnaround.
Yeah.
But yeah, just on, you know, Bradford, because we've not really spoken much about Bradford on this. They've we can see Craig and Joe. They've got.
Craig's just arrived. I heard you say on Bradford it is got off for an hour's nap.
Well, they can do. I've not even mentioned it. But yeah, Bradford, like I said, you know, they hit that consistency earlier on this year. That 7-game unbeaten run, and you know the injury adversity has come and it has hit. You know, Joe Keys is now out for an extended period of time.
Donaldson's a big loss.
Yeah, James Donaldson with the ACL injury. You know, a bit of a heartbreaker, tearjerker, that one. Obviously, after a bruising battle with a little bit of fuggery from Hunslet, you know, Bradford have lost Tom Holmes now for a number of weeks. Bailey Lou's got a concussion. More on that probably on the full 80 minutes, discussing about the neglect from the RFL and the match officials to the, you know, the welfare and player safety sort of aspects. But you know, Bradford doing it a little bit tough at this moment in time, but, you know, if they can go to York on Sunday and come away with, you know, what would, for mine, with the injury adversity with the 7 players that they've got missing, you know, that probably would be their result of the season. Now, a lot of people say, like, acid tests and, you know, season defining. I don't think anything's really season defining with 9 rounds to go.
And the twists and turns because, that no one can predict.
You know, like we say, Toulouse more than likely beat Halifax. Toulouse lose to Halifax. They might lose top spot this weekend, depending on, you know, that result at York. Toulouse all of a sudden out. No, they're not. And even if Bradford were to go to York and suffer a 3rd defeat of the season against York, they're still very much firmly in the mix, but it just makes that little bit more difficult, you know, to get that sort of top 2. And I can't stress enough the importance of finishing in the top 2 in the championship, because you get the week off, the first round of the playoffs, and then you've effectively got a home semi-final, which then runs into the final the weekend after. But yes, it's going to be a really exciting weekend. And, you know, we've not really mentioned Widnes much, but I don't feel, Jimmy, don't know what you're picking up just quickly on Widnes, but I don't think Widnes, I mean, we can't rule them out, but if I was going to pick a club who was likely to take the place of Barrow, who I think are at most risk of coming out, I think I've got Doncaster over Widnes.
Yeah, Widnes are the ultimate no-man land team. They've had their injury problems, and, you know, no disrespect to them, but I don't see them getting top 6. But right, well, let's wrap it up. Who's going to come top?
I still think Toulouse will just edge it. I think, for me...
no, just dead quickly, yeah.
For me, it will be what happens in Toulouse in a couple of weeks' time between Toulouse versus York. I think that will decide top spot.
Me too. I'm going to back York. I think they'll beat Bradford at the weekend, and if they go to Toulouse and beat them, which they can, they'll
finish top.
I can see Toulouse slipping up away from home, and it could be Halifax this weekend.
Yeah, Toulouse have still got to come to Bradford as well. Right. Thank you for joining us. Over and out. Don't forget, full 80 minutes coming up as well.